The next lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about the regulation of bile and pancreatic juice secretion. What makes that happen? We don't need those things produced and secreted all the time. We only really need them produced and secreted to meet our digestive needs. So how is that regulated? And a lot of it gets into some hormones that are involved in regulating the digestive tract. And your textbook is going to go into a lot more detail on these topics, so just keep that in mind if you're reading along in the textbook. I'm not requiring nearly as much detail on this body system as your textbook goes into. Okay, so what about bile production in the liver, production of this? A couple of things stimulate it. One, bile salts in the enterohepatic circulation, so the blood circulation between the intestinal tract and the liver. Remember, that's your portal vein circulation, collecting the blood that's draining off of the intestinal tract and carrying it over to the liver. So bile salts get recycled in a sense. So once bile has been used, the bile salts have been used to help emulsify or dissolve fats. They're actually going to be absorbed along the intestinal lining, transferred back into the bloodstream, and sent right back to the liver. So if you got lots of bile salts that are arriving back in the liver, that's going to tell the hepatocytes in the liver, hey, it's time to make more bile. All right, then there's also a hormone that cells in the duodenum produce called secretin, and secretin also tells the liver make more bile. That's a signaling molecule that stimulates the cells there to do that. And what causes these cells to release secretin? What's the trigger for that? When they detect HCl, that's hydrochloric acid coming in from the stomach, and also fats in the chyme. The chyme is the digestive fluid coming in from the stomach. So that makes sense. The fatty chyme, if you've eaten a meal that's high in fats, what are you going to need to help you digest those fats? You need more bile salts because they're going to help emulsify those so your lipase enzymes can break down those lipids. So that makes sense. So this is actually a hormone produced in the intestinal tract. Hormones get released into the blood. The blood vessels take the hormone to the liver and tell the hepatocytes there to produce more bile. The hepatopancreatic sphincter that we've been talking about, that opens and closes to let the bile and the pancreatic juices into the duodenum, that stays closed unless digestion is active. Okay, so that way you're not squirting bile, you're not squirting pancreatic juice into the duodenum unless digestion is actually occurring, actually active. Okay, the gallbladder. All right, so we just talked about secretin, this hormone that tells the cells in the liver to make more bile. The gallbladder stores the bile and it contracts to squeeze bile through the cystic duct and the bile duct and down to that hepatopancreatic ampulla just before it's going to enter the duodenum. So what lets the gallbladder know, hey, it's time to contract? There's another hormone called cholecystokinin. CCK is the abbreviation for that. And you have cells along the intestinal lining that make this as well. And same thing, when they detect acidic fatty chyme coming in from the stomach, these cells release this CCK. CCK travels through the bloodstream and it goes to the gallbladder. And so the smooth muscle cells in the wall of the gallbladder are the targets, and that hormone triggers those cells to undergo contraction. And so you squeeze the bile down towards the duodenum. The vagus nerve, which is your vagus nerves, are part of your parasympathetic. Many of the nerve fibers in there are parasympathetic nerve fibers. We heard about that before when we were studying heart function. But there are nerve fibers within the vagus nerve that control the intestinal tract as well. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, parasympathetic nervous system activity increases digestive activity. Sympathetic nervous system activity tends to decrease it. So vagus nerve stimulation of the gallbladder also plays a little bit of a role in causing it to contract as well. And some of that stimulation can come from just from you thinking about, or I'm getting ready to eat a meal, or I'm in the process of eating a meal, chewing and so forth. There are nerve impulses that travel down the vagus nerve to your intestinal organs and let them know, hey, start getting ramped up because you're about to have to get to work here. CCK has another role as well. It also stimulates secretion of the pancreatic juices. Okay, so the hepatopancreatic sphincter will relax and the pancreatic juices will be secreted into the duodenum. More specifically, in the pancreas, CCK is going to stimulate the acini in there, those little subunits in there of those acinar cells, to secrete their the juice that they make that has all those various enzymes in it. Now the other hormone we just mentioned that's also made by the duodenum, cells in the duodenum, secretin, one of its targets is, and we talked about how it tells the cells in the liver to make more bile, but it also has as targets the duct cells that line the pancreatic ducts, and they're the cells that release the bicarbonate-rich pancreatic juice. Bicarbonate ions are bases, so they help provide an alkaline pH. The vagus nerve also, parasympathetic nervous system, stimulates some release of pancreatic juices as well. This is a diagram from your textbook which summarizes these things pretty well, and on this diagram what they're showing you here, the little reddish pink circles are supposed to be CCK, and the yellow ones are secretin. These are the two hormones you really need to know about for digestion. I know your textbook provides some additional details, but I'm cutting back on many of those details. But here, of course, you have the stomach, and what they're showing you here, as we talked about earlier, the pyloric sphincter opens, and you get a little bit of chyme that's acidic coming in from the stomach down here into the duodenum. And right here, these cells that are sitting along the inside lining of the duodenum, those are called those are a type of enteroendocrine cells because they produce hormones that facilitate digestion. And you have cells there that release CCK or cholecystokinin and secretin. They're hormones, so they go into the bloodstream. That's what they're showing you here. These things actually have to travel in the blood to the locations where they're going to act on their targets. And CCK, as we talked about, in the pancreas, it stimulates the acini in there to secrete the enzyme-rich pancreatic juices. The secretin tells the cells that are lining these ducts in here to secrete their juices that have a lot of those bicarbonate ions in there that are going to help raise the pH. Now over here in the liver, we said that the secretin hormone tells the cells in the liver to crank out more bile, speed up your bile production. That bile travels down through your hepatic ducts up this way into the gallbladder, and CCK, that hormone, acts on the smooth muscle tissues in the wall of the gallbladder and stimulates the gallbladder to contract. Squeeze the bile this way, back behind the stomach, behind the pancreas, over here to the hepatopancreatic ampulla. CCK also causes the hepatopancreatic sphincter to relax and open up, and out comes the bile, out comes the pancreatic juices. And in number 6 here on this diagram from the textbook, they are, we didn't really talk about the cephalic phase of digestion, but that's digestive process. Cephalic refers to the head, digestive processes that are going on in the head, and even thinking about eating and what's happening when you're eating plays a role in those processes as well. And that causes impulses to travel down the vagus nerve. There are nerve fibers that innervate your digestive organs and play a role in stimulating the pancreas and the gallbladder as well. All right, so for lecture number 8, we're finally going to be back in the small intestine. Now that we have our bile and we have our pancreatic juices, we can really perform most of the digestion of the foods that we've taken in. At this point, when you just come in from the stomach, as we talked about earlier, yes, you've had some digestion from things like salivary amylases, lingual lipases, you have gastric lipase, your proteins have been digested. Your proteins have been denatured, unwound due to the acidic pH of the stomach, and the stomach produces pepsin. Those gastric glands in the stomach make pepsin, which is a protease enzyme that partially chops apart the protein. So that's kind of where we are. You've got some partially digested organic molecules from your foods that are entering the duodenum, but now we've really got to get down to the business of chopping those up into their monomers, because those are the forms that have to be absorbed across the intestinal lining and into the bloodstream so that those can travel to where they need to go inside the body. So that's where we'll pick up with lecture number 8.